What is the main purpose of CSS transitions?
To animate smoothly between two states of a property when it changes, interpolating intermediate values over time.
What is the main purpose of CSS animations?
To animate an element through multiple keyframes over time, including loops and complex multi-step sequences, without needing state changes.
Which CSS property enables a transition?
Transition, shorthand for transition property, transition duration, transition timing function, and transition delay.
What is transition property?
A longhand that names the CSS property, or all, whose changes should be animated. Defaults to all.
What is transition duration?
A longhand that sets how long the transition runs, in seconds, 0.3s, or milliseconds. Default is zeros, meaning no transition.
What is transition delay?
A longhand that sets how long to wait after the change before the transition begins. Default is zeros.
What is transition timing function?
A longhand defining the acceleration curve of the transition, ease, linear, ease in, ease out, steps, cubic Bezier.
What is the default timing function for transitions?
Ease, equivalent to cubic Bezier, 0.25, 0.1, 0.25, 1.0.
What does the cubic Bezier function take?
For numbers p1x, p1y, p2x, p2y in the range 0 to 1, for x, defining the control points of a cubic Bezier curve describing speed over time.
What does the steps timing function do?
Divides the animation into a fixed number of discrete jumps instead of a smooth interpolation. Steps, for end, produces 4 visible frames.
What does steps n jump end mean?
The animation jumps at the end of each step. The element shows the start value until each step completes, then snaps to the next value.
What does steps n jumpstart mean?
The animation jumps at the start of each step. The first value change is shown immediately and n1 more jumps follow.
What is the difference between steps and a normal easing function?
Steps produces discrete, staircase-like progress. Normal easing functions produce continuous, smooth interpolation.
What is the shorthand syntax for a transition on one property?
Transition, opacity 200 milliseconds ease in out, property, duration, timing function, optional delay, delay must be the second time value.
Can a transition include multiple properties in one declaration?
Yes. Transition, opacity 200 milliseconds, transform 300 milliseconds ease out, sets separate durations and easings for each property.
What happens if you set transition duration 0?
The transition is effectively disabled, the change is instant, behaving as if no transition were defined.
When does a transition actually start?
When the value of a watched property changes, typically triggered by a pseudoclass hover, focus, a class change, or a JavaScript style update.
What kinds of property changes can be transitioned?
Only animatable properties with a defined interpolation between values. Discrete properties like display cannot be smoothly transitioned.
Can the display property be transitioned smoothly?
No display switches values instantly. Use visibility plus opacity, or a small transition delay on display, none to defer the actual hide.
Can you transition visibility like opacity?
Visibility is special, it can be transitioned but jumps at the midpoint, visible from 0 to 50%, hidden from 50 to 100%, when using linear timing.
Which CSS property makes an element animatable through keyframes?
Animation, used together with at keyframes to define the sequence.
What is the at keyframes rule used for?
To define the named stages of an animation, listing the styles the element should have at each percentage of the timeline.
What is the syntax of A at keyframes block?
At keyframes name 0%, 50%, 100%. Percentages, or from and to, mark keyframe positions.
What does the animation name property do?
Specifies which at keyframes rule to use. Without it, no animation runs.
What does animation duration do?
Sets the total length of one animation cycle, e.g. 2's. Default is 0's, meaning the animation is disabled.
What does animation iteration count control?
How many times the animation cycle repeats. Use a number, 3, or infinite for endless looping. Default is 1.
What does animation direction control?
The direction of playback, normal, reverse, alternate, forward then backward, or alternate reverse. Default is normal.
What does animation fill mode do?
Defines what styles the element retains outside the animation runtime, none, forwards, backwards, or both.
What does animation playstate do?
Pauses or resumes the animation, running or paused. Can be toggled on hover.
What is the animation shorthand order?
Animation, name duration timing function delay iteration count direction fill mode playstate. Only the first two are required.
What is the difference between transition delay and animation delay?
Transition delay defers a single change event. Animation delay defers the start of the first iteration of a keyframe animation.
What is the difference between animation and transition?
A transition needs a state change trigger and runs once between two values. An animation runs automatically, can loop, and uses multi-step keyframes.
What does will change do, and why is it used with animations?
It hints to the browser that an element will be animated, often promoting it to its own compositor layer to improve performance.
Name 3 animatable transform functions used in transitions/animations.
Translate, rotate, scale, plus skew and matrix.
Why is it preferable to animate transform and opacity over top/left?
Transform and opacity are usually promoted to the GPU and don't trigger layout or paint, only composite, so they animate more smoothly.
What causes a layout thrash during animation?
Animating properties that affect layout, width, height, top, left, margin, forces the browser to recalculate layout every frame, hurting performance.
What does compositing mean in browser rendering?
The final step where painted layers are combined into the screen image. Animations on transform/opacity can be done in this stage alone.
What is the typical frame rate browsers aim for?
60 frames per second, meaning each frame should complete in 16.7 ms.
What is easing?
The function that maps time progress to animation progress, controlling the perceived acceleration and deceleration of motion.
What does the ease in timing function do?
Starts slow and accelerates toward the end, cubic Bezier, 0.42011.
What does the ease out timing function do?
Starts fast and decelerates toward the end, cubic Bezier, 0.581, good for elements coming to rest.
What does the ease in out timing function do?
Accelerates in the middle and is slow at the start and end, cubic Bezier, 0.420, 0.581.
What does the linear timing function do?
Constant speed from start to end, cubic Bezier, 0.011.
What is a Bezier curve used for in CSS easing?
It defines an acceleration curve, with x equals time progress and y equals value progress. The shape determines how the animation feels.
What does animation timing function apply to?
It sets the easing between each pair of adjacent keyframes, not across the whole animation, so different keyframe pairs can use different easings.
Can each keyframe in a keyframes block have its own timing function?
Yes. Each keyframe selector can include its own animation timing function to control how it moves to the next.
What does the prefers reduced motion media query do?
It detects the user's OS level setting to reduce motion. Designers use it to disable or simplify animations for accessibility.
How do you respect reduced motion preferences in CSS?
Wrap heavy animations in it media, prefers reduced motion, no preference, or use prefers reduced motion, reduced to override durations.
What is a keyframe percentage?
A marker like 0%, 50%, or 100% inside it keyframes that defines the styles at that point of the animation timeline.
What happens at 0% and 100% if you omit one init keyframes?
The browser uses the element's current style for the missing endpoint. From is shorthand for 0% to for 100%.
Can a single at keyframes block target multiple properties?
Yes. Each keyframe selector can set any number of properties, transform, opacity, color, etc., and all are interpolated.
What is the difference between opacity, 0 and visibility, hidden?
Opacity, 0 makes the element fully transparent but still clickable and in the layout. Visibility, hidden makes it invisible and unclickable but keeps its layout space.
How do you fade an element out smoothly?
Use transition, opacity 300 milliseconds ease, and toggle a class that sets opacity 0. The element gradually becomes transparent.
What does the transform property do?
Applies 2D or 3D transformations, translate, rotate, scale, skew, to an element without affecting surrounding layout.
What is the transform origin property?
Sets the point around which transforms are applied. Default is 50% 50%, the element's center.
What does transform, translate, 50px, 0 do?
Moves the element 50 pixels to the right, without affecting its position in the document flow.
What does transform, scale, 1.5 do?
Enlarges the element to 1.5 times its size, with respect to transform origin.
What does transform, rotate, 45 degrees do?
Rotates the element 45 degrees clockwise.
What does the order of transform functions matter?
Yes. Transform, rotate, 45 degrees, translate x, 100px, is not the same as translate x, 100px, rotate, 45 degrees, transforms apply right to left.
What is a 3D transform?
A transform using functions like translate 3D, rotate x, rotate y, rotate z, or perspective that gives the element depth.
What does perspective do in CSS?
Sets the distance from the viewer to the z equals 0 plane, controlling the apparent depth of 3D transforms.
What is the difference between perspective on the parent and on the element?
Perspective on the parent affects all child 3D transforms collectively. Perspective, as a transform function, affects only that element.
What does transform style, preserve 3D do?
Makes child elements keep their 3D position relative to each other and the parent, instead of being flattened to the 2D plane.
What does backface visibility control?
Whether the back side of a 3D transformed element is visible. Default is visible. Setting it to hidden hides the back, useful for card flip effects.
What is the difference between transition and transform?
Transform is a property that changes an element's geometry. Transition is a feature that animates any animatable property when its value changes.
What is the most common mistake when writing the transition shorthand?
Forgetting that the first time value is duration and the second is delay. Transition, opacity 1's 200 milliseconds, means 1's duration, 200 milliseconds delay.
What happens if you set transition duration without a unit?
It's invalid in most browsers. Always use S or MS as transition duration, 0 defaults to zeros, but 1 is not a valid duration.
What is the difference between at keyframes and at media?
At keyframes define animation timelines. At media applies styles based on the environment, viewport, container, user preferences.
What does the animation fill mode backwards value do?
Applies the first keyframe styles to the element during the animation delay period, before the animation actually starts.
What does the animation fill mode forwards value do?
Keeps the last keyframe styles applied to the element after the animation ends, instead of reverting to the original.
What does animation fill mode both do?
Combines forwards and backwards, applies the first keyframe during the delay and the last keyframe after the end.
How do you make a CSS animation loop seamlessly?
Use animation iteration count, infinite, and make the 100% keyframe match the 0% keyframe, so the loop has no visible jump.
What is a ping-pong animation?
An animation that runs forward and then backward, achieved with animation direction, alternate.
What is a common trick to stagger multiple animations?
Set a different animation delay on each element so they start at offset times, creating a cascading effect.
What is the animation delay -1s trick?
A negative delay starts the animation as if it had already been running, useful for beginning an animation mid-cycle.
What is the difference between animation iteration count, infinite and infinite duration?
Iteration count controls how many times the cycle repeats, duration controls the length of one cycle. They are independent.
What is the transition end event?
A JavaScript event fired on an element when a CSS transition completes, useful for chaining animations or cleanup.
What is the animation end event?
A JavaScript event fired on an element when one iteration of a CSS animation finishes.
How can you animate a custom property, CSS variable?
Register the property with @property, give it a syntax and initial value, then it can be transitioned/animated with @keyframes.
What does the @property rule do?
It declares a custom property with an explicit type, initial value, and inheritance, enabling the property to be animated.
What is the typical syntax of @property?
@property myvar, syntax, inherits, false, initial value, number 000.
What is the difference between transition, all 300 milliseconds, and transition, transform 300 milliseconds?
All animates every changing property, which can cause unintended animations. Naming a specific property is safer and more performant.
What is a pop effect in CSS animation?
A quick scale-up combined with a fade-in, often created with transform, scale 0.8, scale 1, and opacity 0.1.
How do you make an element spin continuously?
Animation, spin 1's linear infinite, with @keyframe spin, 2, transform, rotate, 360 degrees.
What is a common use of transition on hover?
Dot button, transition, background color 200 milliseconds ease. Dot button, hover, background color, blue, smoothly changes color on hover.
Why is animating height auto not directly possible?
Because auto has no fixed numeric value to interpolate from. Workarounds include max height with a large value, or interpolate size, allow keywords.
What does interpolate size allow keywords enable?
It permits CSS to interpolate between keyword sizes like auto, allowing transitions on height, auto.
What is a spinner in CSS?
A small rotating element used to indicate loading, usually made with animation. Spin 1's linear infinite and border radius, 50%.
What is the difference between visibility and opacity transitions?
Opacity transitions are smooth and continuous. Visibility transitions are discrete, snapping at 50% of the duration.
How do you make a pulsing button?
Animation. Pulse 1.5s ease in out infinite, with at keyframes pulse that scales between 1 and 1.05.
What is a common way to animate SVG paths?
Use stroke-array and stroke-offset with CSS Transitions/Animation to draw the path from start to end.
What is stroke-array?
An SVG property that defines the dash pattern of a stroke. Setting it equal to the path length controls how much of the path is visible.
What does animating stroke-offset do?
It moves the dash pattern along the path, which is commonly used to create a drawing or erasing effect on SVG strokes.
What is the difference between transitions and SMIL animations?
SMIL is an SVG native animation system. CSS Transitions/Animations are preferred because SMIL is deprecated in some browsers.
What is flip in CSS animation?
A technique, first, last, invert, play, used to animate layout changes smoothly. JS measures positions, then CSS transitions handle the visual move.
What is the View Transition API?
A modern CSS feature that lets you animate the visual state change between two DOM states, using ViewTransitionName and document.startViewTransition.
How does the ViewTransitionName property work?
It gives an element a unique name so the browser can match it between two states and animate its position, size, and appearance.
What is the simplest hover effect with transition?
Dot button, background, #CCC, transition, background 200 milliseconds, dot button, hover, background, number 888, a smooth color change.
What is the difference between a transition and a JavaScript-driven animation?
Transitions are declarative, run on the compositor, and don't require JS frames. JS animations, request animation frame, require code execution per frame.
How do you pause a CSS animation with JS?
Set element.style.animation playstate equals paused, or remove/reapply the animation property.
How do you restart a CSS animation?
Remove the animation property, or set animation, none, force a reflow, e.g. element.offset width, then re-add the original animation.
What is a common accessibility issue with CSS animations?
Continuous motion can trigger discomfort or vestibular issues. Mitigate with prefers reduced motion.
What is scroll-driven animation in CSS?
A modern feature where an animation is tied to a scroll timeline, animation timeline, scroll, so progress is driven by scroll position rather than time.
What is animation timeline?
A property that replaces animation duration, animation delay, and animation iteration count when the animation is driven by a scroll or view timeline.
What does scroll behavior, smooth, do?
Animates the scroll of an anchor link or programmatic scroll to call over a short period, rather than snapping.
What does a stagger mean in CSS animation?
Applying slightly different animation delay values to a group of elements so they animate sequentially rather than all at once.
What is the role of transform, translate z, 0?
It hints the GPU to promote the element to its own layer, sometimes used as a legacy performance trick. Modern code prefers will change.
What is will change, transform, opacity?
A hint to the browser that those properties will change, allowing it to pre-allocate compositor layers for smoother animation.
What are the downsides of overusing will change?
Each layer consumes memory and GPU resources. Using it on many elements can hurt overall performance.
What is the difference between a transition and a CSS animation triggered by a hover?
Both can play on hover, but a hover transition runs once when the mouse enters and reverses on leave. A hover animation can repeat while hovered.
What does animation fill mode, none, do, the default?
The element styles are only affected while the animation is running. Before start and after end, it returns to its base styles.
How do you make a slide-in effect from the left?
At keyframe slide-in, from Transform, Translate X, -100%, to Transform, Translate X, 0, and apply it with a duration and easing.
What is overshoot easing and how is it achieved?
Easing that goes past the target value before settling, creating a spring-like feel. Achieved with a cubic Bezier whose Y21.
What is the difference between it to and 100% keyframe?
They are equivalent. To is just an alias for 100%, and from is an alias for 0%.
What does display none do to running animations/transitions?
Stopping the element from being rendered cancels any active animations or transitions. The animation end/transition end events are not fired when this happens.
How do you keep a transition target reachable for screen readers?
Pair opacity/transform with visibility, hidden/visible, or display none after a delay, so assistive tech treats it correctly.
Why might transition all cause performance issues?
Because it animates every changing property, including unintended ones like transform or filter, which can be expensive.
What is a ripple effect in CSS?
A circular highlight that expands and fades from a click point, typically achieved with an absolutely positioned element, scale animation, and opacity transition.
What is the difference between animating width and animating transform, scale X?
Scale X uses the GPU and doesn't trigger layout. Width triggers reflow every frame and is much slower for animation.
What is a staggered list animation?
A list where each item fades/slides in with a slightly later animation delay, creating a cascade effect.